Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you. My name is Pam Schaff. I'm the director of the Master of Science in Narrative Medicine program and the HEAL program. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's reading by Jonathan Chou. Jonathan is a poet, educator, and psychiatrist. He received his, can you hear me better now? Yeah. Okay. He received his Master of Science in Narrative Medicine from Columbia and his MD from Keck School of Medicine here, and completed his adult psychiatry residency at Massachusetts General Hospital and McLean Hospital. Clinically, he is interested in Asian American, and Pacific Islander mental health and psychodynamic psychotherapy. Drawing on reading in psychoanalytic theory, critical race theory, experimental poetry of the Asian diaspora, and Asian American literary criticism, his work across disciplines and genres explores the interface of diasporic Asian identity and mental health. His poetry, Chapbook Poems, was selected as a semifinalist for the 2022 Snowbound Chapbook Award. His debut collection, Resemblance, was published in 2024 and won the 2023 Alma Book Award. I'm very proud of him, and we'll hear from him today. On a more sort of personal note, I met Jonathan when he arrived here at Keck School of Medicine from Columbia's master's program, and he introduced himself and asked if he could have my advisorship, mentorship on some narrative medicine research projects that he was interested in doing. And he completed 2 projects while a student at Keck School of Medicine, that's really hard to do. So congratulations, Jonathan. We're still very appreciative of that work that advanced our field. And he also established partnership with our community partners who established a partnership with Special Services for Groups, which is a social services umbrella agency that provides services to our community. And his relationship with that organization became critical to our new master's program. And we still have that relationship because of Jonathan's involvement. And he's now an instructor in our Master of Science Narrative Medicine program, starting this semester. He will be teaching our pedagogy class with Dr. Wright. So he has remained a part of our world, and we're very grateful for that. And with that, I will turn things over to you.
You all hear me okay? So hey everyone, I'm Jonathan. Thank you, Dr. Schaff, Dr. Wright. Thank you, Paige, for setting this up and having me here. It very much feels, I was reflecting on this as I was coming in, just how familiar the drive is from Pasadena, where I lived when I was a med student, to here, and just how familiar the roads are, and yet how unfamiliar this moment is in LA with the fires going on. And I'm really happy and glad to be here. I made sure that this trip happened, really in many ways because of what's going on. And I feel very, very sort of thankful and grateful to be here. So I'm gonna read from my book, Resemblance, which came out in October of last year. And it's a book that I started writing during the pandemic, really, sort of 2019, 2020. And I was thinking about how the fact that our lives were very much lived at the time on Zoom, and there was this kind of like visual sort of aspect to our daily lives, whether or not that had an impact on the fact that there were so many images and photographs and sort of visual memories in this book. And it's part of the reason why I have this is all to say, this is why there's a screen behind me, basically. During the presentation, it's not a presentation, during the reading, I'll be showing some photographs that are in the book, basically, that were some of the materials that I found myself engaging with during the course of writing this book. I wanted to start though with the first poem in the book, which is called Three Cameras. And I'll just go ahead and read it. Three cameras. Stolen symbols for. Instead of a pet, my father bought us a point-and-shoot camera from Guanghua Sangcang, where he used to go with friends, a lanky, unathletic young man sporting the aviators of a time my knowledge of coming from the few photos my mother kept. See him there, killing time, marveling electronics. Then the latest in the Canon PowerShot Ixus series. In retrospect, it was considered compact by every standard. Too enthralled to dissect, still through instinct a body invents systems to manipulate. My hand feels the way it tells me this is an Ixus. In quadrangles found mirrors, now memories of. Tianmu. Winded trees cast shadow branches upon a cracked wall. The Great Wall Plastic Factory was the first manufacturer of the Diana, a toy factory in Kowloon, Hong Kong, established in 1955 in baby blue, so as to appeal to amateurs. A case containing 12 dozen sold whole for 50 cents per unit. The Industrial Arts Supplies Importer Power Sales Company of Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, received. According to the Encyclopedia of 20th Century Photography, like us, it traveled under other names. Annie, Arrow, Arrow Flash, Asiana, Banner, Bannier, Color Flash Deluxe, Debonair, Diana Deluxe, Diane F, Dione F2, Dories, Flocon RF, High Flash, Justin, Mina, Mina S, Mark L, Megomatic, Merit Mirage, Panax Photon 120, Pioneer, Raleigh, Reliance, Roscoe, Rover, C, Shakies, Stellar, Stellar Flash, Tina, Traceflex, TrueView, Valiant, Windsor, Zip, and Zodiac. Over time, multiplicity yields to an empty frame, no mystery we feel adrift. It was intended a cut-ray consolation. He learned to aim one finger breadth to the left to take account. The trajectory, the shutter opens. By cicada sound, feel heat of summer, stolen moments for alley roaming. What does a dream feel like? With bodies, we make vectors to the world. Port of entry. He makes a crumple of it all. The car sputters. For many, the quaintness of New England turns out quite the convincing image of bliss. In its original form, the contrast of numerals in gold leaf with the wrought iron fence was felt great. Or in old buildings, reading old books, where pretense means holding the great works of the Western world in mind like a fat stool, a well-rounded education in the theory of shapes and ethereal real-world applications figures merit. What of myths and traditions that rely on a sense of belonging where there is none translates to business as usual, including clandestine, since 1869, when Liber Brunensis was founded for publishing membership lists of the vaunted secret societies, first without senior portraits per Martha Mitchell's Encyclopedia Brunoniana until 1896, then the era of albumin silver prints made with hen's eggs and silver nitrate, which rendered in sharp the unsmiling faces of all white men except one black guy from Mystic, so putting a face to the racism of the time, so to speak. Later, I become assistant photo editor, then photo editor of this esteemed vehicle of history. In time, a word's letters take shape in the world to define what is and is beyond us, but even chains can be broken out of. So if true that the unconscious is structured like a language, then lack is to be found in an optical experience, and the possibility of saying what it is to be a them in language lies in the visual. I am talking about reclaiming the diasporic subject and the penchant for pleasure and bad behavior which unite the poet and the crook. I took off after the fact, and all that remains was. The subject in every case is my pleasure. So, I think I have this here, my pointer, handy dandy pointer. The next poem that I'm going to read is called 1947, 2021. and really is a kind of ekphrastic sort of meditation on this photograph, which is from February 28th, 1947, also known as the 228 incident in Taiwan's sort of history, contemporary history, which was a moment basically where Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang nationalist government had arrived in Taiwan, and basically the day prior, on February 27th, a kind of fight broke out, and because of simmering political tensions and the aftermath of the Japanese colonial occupation, basically this sort of 228 incident happened where tens of thousands of people were killed, and from that point began this period of martial law, which for a long time was actually the longest period of martial law in any anywhere in the world, basically. And so one of the things that happened during those years that I was writing this book, I discovered something. A great aunt of mine, actually, who lived in Alhambra, told me a story about how my family was actually affected by this in a personal way, and I had no idea about that, and it sort of shook me. And so this is a piece that kind of talks about that. 1947, 2021. A nation's consciousness blooms from a field of graves, the silhouettes of heads like headstones. I look upon them, look with them, my kith and kin. It is the darkness awakening in each which is the dead friend. When in medical school, I learned the deceptiveness of bullet wounds, the devastation caused within which cannot be forgotten. Unable to see, we make do with mythology. In Alhambra, a great aunt tells me that her brother-in-law, my mother's uncle, was there. His friend, or was it his brother, was shot dead, and he went, retrieved the body from the smoke-filled streets, and went mad. The path in is overgrown and lost easily, still it leads. Jamais vu, when in words the spaces between letters open into sky, yawning to engulf. Memory coheres as loosely, and empty corners whisper of obsolescence. Lost to time, a thick smoke obscures. They watch as he is drawn in. In the dark, in the distance, two ghostly sails rise up. The flaming pile takes center stage. What comes from grief, what flickers? The dead hide their faces, the tens of thousands. What is not seen is felt indelibly. The permanent dislocation captured in the estimate is not the image, but its incomprehensibility inherited. The failure of ekphrasis is the knife cutting through time. On the way to the station, we said little. Years were waited, and you had moved on. The umbrella lay cracked in the wet street, and the stars, which had guided, were dreamt of. Street cleaning every Thursday. At face value, everything was as it had been. You estimated the time it would take us to get back. It was not just a matter of timing. The question had always been how to say nothing. Finally, we stopped looking for a way out. Like wax reforming in the sudden dark, the shapes words take betray the movement of stars. What stung caresses, solace found in loss. You were there even when. Noticed then that the watch had stopped working. I had attempted to tell you everything. The new door swung open both ways, and the broken glass was not picked up. We were contented to fail again. Our mail makes a small pile on the kitchen counter. You and I have a number of loose ends in common. We look for each other through the aisles. The flowers you photographed are in my car still. This is the next piece in the book, and it really is a kind of I should mention content warning that there is a graphic image depicting violence. I should have said that before I showed this. And the poem that I'm going to read has some themes related to that. So this is another image that I found myself sort of engaging with around the time of writing this book. And I found it online, and it was from, a Medium article, and it came with this caption that said, and this is in the book, Army of Chiang Kai-shek executing Taiwanese citizens in 1947. And I found myself engaging with this image and writing into it, writing out of it. I spent like a good 2-3 months just like working with this image. And then one day I discovered that it actually wasn't an image from the 228 incident, and it wasn't even from Taiwan at all. And it turns out that there was this whole sort of like political scandal basically in, I think, the like early 2000s, where basically a cable TV station sort of not celebrating, but commemorating the sort of anniversary of 228. I think it was either this, I think the 60th anniversary. They basically put together this like documentary, and they used footage from actually another massacre entirely, and it became this like huge political scandal where the different sort of political parties got into this huge argument that kind of took over the country. But I realized that in many ways that's kind of what this piece is about, is the ways in which I could happen upon an image and have it stir up so much in me, and yet this way in which the image was not actually accurate. And what does that mean? And why is it that we have these feelings and can have these kinds of experiences? So the title is Kou, which is a Mandarin word that means mouth. Kou. Army of Chiang Kai-shek executing Taiwanese citizens in 1947. What is accessible is the sense of having been created by moments that have no memory of. But the sounds that came out were not words, but their opposite. Hua. There is a straightforward meaning to what is depicted, but not here, or the way they appear like actors upon a stage, where I seek nation and find distance. What is revealed is how we are born into all prior obscurations, or choosing to keep history silent, the dead lie flat on the ground, or silence history. The stadium erupted in cheers and was heard a distant roar that shuddered when on that day the clouds came in from all directions, or his is poetry recited from the margins. How? I watch from the window as they drive off, or what spans every distance is the yearning, so the photograph is a symbol of, or I am the emptiness howling across generations. Toto. What a wave is a question about the ocean, or they left empty-handed and he gazed at the bird soar. Anliu. My parents' dreams of a distant, where corners stand empty, a home becomes the form time takes. We spoke from rooms to time. It is darkened, still we feel each. Uwen. A garment hung up recalls the warmth of a body even. There would be no difference between them under the new law, or glimpses of you in the interstices. Trenjafu. He awoke one morning to discover his arm no longer part of his. It would not utter. We faced them to them. When asked by reporters why the narration of the Geelong Harbor shooting was voiced over, or in view of, or footage of the Shanghai massacre in the program, Chen said that the narration did not match the images, but she implied that this did not amount to fabrication. Nonetheless, from received forms, new shoots reach sky toward, and journalism tries to cover its tracks. Viewers must be thinking that the video images portrayed what actually happened is what actually happened is what actually happened during the 228 incident, because the program did not indicate otherwise is the childhood home we left behind for distance. The reporting was obviously a case of 以花接木, and thereby misleading the viewers, the report said, while poetry flashed its seams. Professor Hu of National Taiwan Normal University's Graduate Institute of Mass Communication echoed Lin's view: the chamber was built to be heard, invasion, saying that the sensitivity of the 228 incident requires extra caution, straight shot, docile missile, corpus replica in the production of reports. The audio should match the images, and unrelated pictures should never be used, he stressed, and Sky closes as quickly. Political commentators on the talking show last night threw the blame on field coordinates to mirror the opposition KMT for a mutual weaponization, saying shell fragments that a near diffusion of light eclipses, and the party was the one attribute to nothing, fabricating the truth of the 228 incident. At a press conference yesterday, KMT legislator Hong said, "There is a saying that when a lie is told 1,000 times, it becomes a truth. This was the subjugation is etched into SET TV's motive for the special report, a silence more brutal than imaginable, to make people think of the KMT when the brutal image comes to mind. We want to thank SET TV for making the special report on the 228 incident. While the image was not about the 228 incident, many people were killed in exactly the same way as that's shown in the film." And I thought I would end with some work that I've been doing recently that's not in the book. I've been thinking a lot about California and about natural disaster. I was 2 when the Northridge earthquake happened, and my family had just moved here back. Basically, I was born here, but then we left and then we came back. We had moved back only a few months prior to that. And I've been thinking a lot about the ways in which, I think as Jordan actually said at some point, if you're not careful, LA can kill you. I mean, there's a way in which I think people don't realize that this landscape, this environment, as comfortable as it is, when you take away all those things, it's actually quite inhospitable. And I found myself tying that to actually the history of, for example, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and the way in which it wasn't the earthquake that did the most damage, but the fires that burned 80% of the city, and how actually within the city, the Chinatown area was one of the worst affected. And one of the things that happened that I didn't know this until I started looking into it is that this earthquake and the fires that happened is actually why Angel Island immigration station was built, was because a lot of the people who lived in Chinatown lost their immigration paperwork. And so they could start basically claiming that they were US citizens when maybe they weren't. And so the US government created Angel Island in order to detain and then interrogate people coming from overseas in order to determine whether or not they were telling the truth. I didn't realize that the history of Asian American exclusion really is tied to natural disaster, to earthquakes, and to fires. And I've been thinking a lot about that. I'm going to skip the next poem, which is actually one from this book, and just move on to this visual poem that I'm working on right now. So this is, I'm going to move a little bit here because I'm going to read from it later. This is a document that I found basically in the archives of the US government that shows a transcript of somebody who arrived through Angel Island and basically went through an interrogation process. It turns out this person is Tyrus Wong, for anyone who knows Tyrus Wong. He's the main illustrator behind Bambi. And his story is amazing. And I was thinking about how growing up in LA, in Northridge, I had a picture of Bambi in my room. And I never realized that was Tyrus Wong and how, his history. But basically, he came through Angel Island when he was 11. And he had to memorize this whole sort of story about how he was related to somebody else who came through in order so that he could enter as a U.S. citizen. So he basically came as a paper son. And basically what I did is I took this document, took the transcript, and then did like an erasure, then a collage over it, basically. And I have it here on my phone. I meant to print it, but the Santa Ana winds got to me. So this is called Hearth. What are all your names? I do not know. Before, present, ever, home, arrived, the latter part of last. What is your mother's name, age, kind? Your next brother, all children, village named. Do you remember your family, how you went, your house? Just earth floors, the small door. Grandfather, I see. Grandmother, I see a headstone, offering and touch each. Father, in Canton City, he comes, stays, goes back, looking for business. Robbers, before my father came home, they injured my mother. They took away our ancestral tablets dedicated to the names of those they belong to. Do you remember? Do you remember? Do you cross any bridges or streams of water? We cross a small bridge, yes. Thank you.
Obviously, there's so much of a relationship between visual and the written word, but also you're doing a reading and, looking at the way the poems are written and laid out, just kind of visually, but also then hearing you read. I just wanted you to talk maybe a little bit about how that. So we'll talk a little bit just about the visual element, but also reading, the experience of reading it. And when you're writing, are you reading it? Or are you just like looking at it and thinking it?
I'm not sure if I should like look out this way or look at you or something, but I don't really know. I mean, I think when I was writing it, I didn't think I would ever read it. So yeah, so there's that. And I think part of what I was interested in was, really just this idea that like we have, our relationship to memory is very much mediated by image, mediated by the visual. That's, I think, certainly especially true in our kind of like image-dominated culture, increasingly. TikTok, not to mention TikTok during this talk, but I found myself very interested in this book in general, in thinking about the sort of the reliability and the unreliability of images in mediating access to histories that we were not actually sort of present for, that we somehow kind of inherited through story or again through image and archive. So I think that's what I think of.
I think one of the things I was noticing too is the role of like research in your work, and maybe even thinking about it's a book of poetry, but what genre, how you think about genre in relation to like your craft.
So I felt like a big impetus for writing this book was this sense that I didn't have something to say, or that I couldn't say something because I didn't have the right to, or I didn't have the right account of it. And even on the level of like, I grew up in Taiwan, and for a long time, I felt like my English was not good enough, even though it's totally fine. And I think that's actually an experience of minoritization, racialization within like American culture. And so one of the things that I was really interested in was how can I find and write in an English that feels true to me. And I think the corollary of that is this idea of, even though the images might not be ones that I, sort of fully understand, that doesn't mean that I don't have a relationship to them that is based in a sort of true experience of myself and my family and my community and America. In this book, a lot of it is about Taiwan and Taiwan's history, but it's also very much about, I think, the experience of being Asian American, or being sort of racialized in America, basically. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the genre piece, it just kind of happened, and it was, I think, a reflection of what I was reading and what I found myself drawn to. I mean, I think this idea of like hyphenation and hybridity felt very right to me in terms of what I was talking about and the themes of diaspora and sort of in-betweenness. So that felt very right to me.
This is kind of adjacent to what you just read. I'm wondering about your process. I know you are a physician and a teacher, and then somehow you're also writing a book of poetry. So I'm just interested in like, how do you decide how to spend your time, and where does the creativity fit into all the other components of life?
Thanks, Marianne. That's a great question. I write mostly in the morning, and I read in the afternoon, and I go to work in between. But I definitely felt like during the pandemic, which was also when I was in residency, which was also when I was working in the hospital a lot, because we were the bottom line in very many ways. And I think also about George Floyd, and I think about the Black Lives Matter movement, that really kind of, I mean, talking about fires, kind of, it was a whole intersection of things happening around that time. And I wrote because I couldn't not write. It felt like the only place that I could express myself. I think also about the sort of anti-Asian racism that was coming up around, that time as well, which I think, very much is tied to what this book's about. So, and then, in many ways, I think that's what I've been doing, to your question, sort of balancing different things for as long as I can remember. And so in many ways, I'm very used to it, and it just is a part of my life. I don't really think of them as separate, even though I haven't yet figured out how to write at work, which don't tell my boss, but that's kind of what I'm working towards. So yeah, thanks.
This question isn't fully thought out, but I was really struck by the history of the wrong image, and I'm sure all of us spent a lot of time thinking about truth and facts and artificial intelligence and what's real and what's not. And there was some aspect of that moment and the way you represented it that was, I can't say comforting, but it was somehow like it anchored some of what I am so anxious about, when I think about how we discern truth and the historical record and whatever. That what we're dealing with is nothing new, I guess, is maybe a way of saying it. But I really appreciated that the way you represented that moment and the way you talked about it, both in your sort of contextualization, but in the work itself. So I don't know if that's a question or a comment, but something I'm thinking about.
No, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chou. It's like, I think one of the more obscure sort of contextual work relationships in this book. So as in like, I think it in many ways has been hard for me to know how to introduce the piece and then sort of talk about it, because I think it is so complicated. But I feel like when I was thinking about it, it really brought up a lot of questions about ethics and representation, basically. But one of the things that I didn't mention in the sort of introduction is that there is no video footage of the 228 incident. And I think that's part of the reason why there's something about that feels really important, that when there's an absence of the record because of political oppression and suppression, what do we do with our relationship to that event and the absences of it? And yeah, I mean, I think the sort of last page of that poem, which is really it's a quote by somebody whose family member died and basically was murdered during the White Terror period. She basically sort of, I think, captures it pretty well, which is that even though this image and the footage is not from that moment, it still captures something about the ways in which people in which violence is inflicted upon people. And so can we have a relationship and orientation to that violence, even though we don't have access to the images or to the memories or to the history per se?
I was also curious, in your introduction to the 228 poem, you mentioned how even though when you were researching, you found that this image wasn't true, it still sparked some form of emotion. And I'm curious, in your work in psychiatry, if that formed any new perspectives when you were talking to your patients.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think for a long time, I mean, kind of back to what Miriam was saying, for a long time I was like trying to sort of articulate an identity for myself as a poet, as not related to psychiatry and my clinical work. And then I was in a workshop with Morgan Parker, and I was like saying something like that, like, I don't write about medicine. And she was like, I don't know about that. Like, and I think one of the ways that I understand what she's saying is, I think there's many interpretations or sort of ways that I thought about it since then. But one of the ways is the sort of emphasis on historical trauma and racial trauma. And I think a lot about, with my patients, the way in which absence is actually something that we have a relationship to. I think a lot of people don't necessarily sort of include that. Our approach to medicine is very kind of like, is the right word, kind of like positive in the sense that it's only if something is there that we do something about it. But I think in the case of something like historical trauma, like racial identity, like a minoritized identity, there's so much more that is actually about our relationship to what we don't have access to, or what isn't there. And there's all kinds of feelings that can come up around that, like some form of guilt or some, like how do our parents who were the ones who were supposed to give us that history, if they didn't, how do we understand that? How does that inform our relationship to them? I mean, I think there's a lot there.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Jonathan, and we'll set up and you'll get you some food.